The sun dipped behind the jagged mountains, spilling long shadows over the kingdom of Valdoria. Its people moved quickly through the cobblestone streets, their whispers sharper than the chill in the evening air. In the royal court, rumors traveled faster than arrows, and today the whispers were about her. Ilara. She's Barren. Sell her before she ruins the family name, one of the nobles sneered as he passed the hall. His words struck like daggers meant to wound and humiliate. Ilara, standing at the edge of the courtyard, kept her head bowed, pretending not to hear. But she did. She always did. Ilara's life had been marked by shadows and scorn. From a young age, she had been told that her worth depended not on her mind, courage, or spirit, but on her ability to bear children. She had watched women stronger and cleverer than herself rise in power because they fulfilled that one duty. She had been overlooked, dismissed, and now, at 22, she faced the harshest judgment yet. Being sold to a distant land, her future nothing more than a transaction in a game she had never asked to play. Her father, a man torn between love and duty, sighed as he entered the courtyard. "Ilara," he said softly, his voice heavy with regret. "The council has decided. They will sell you at the next ceremony. There is no choice left." Ilara lifted her chin slowly. Her heart pounded, but her voice remained calm, though firm. "There is always a choice, father, always." He shook his head. "Not here. Not now. You are nothing to them but a name and a womb." Anger and fear swirled inside her. She had spent years surviving their judgment, hiding her talents, her thoughts, and now her life itself was considered worthless. Yet despite the shame that clung to her like a second skin, she refused to let it break her. The day of the sale arrived, and the royal courtyard was crowded with nobles, merchants and traders from distant lands. They were eager to see her, to appraise her as one would a prized horse or jewel. Ilara's heart hammered, but she walked with her head held high. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her fear. The master of ceremonies, a tall man with a sharp nose and sharper tongue, stepped forward. "Today we offer the daughter of House Valdoria to the highest bidder. Let all who wish to claim her step forward." His voice carried through the courtyard like a bell tolling doom. Ilara scanned the crowd, noting the leering faces and calculating eyes. Some whispered amongst themselves, speculating about her failure, her barrenness, her supposed worthlessness. She had imagined this moment countless times in the solitude of her room, and now facing it in reality, she felt the cold bite of isolation. But then, from the shadows at the edge of the courtyard, a figure appeared. He moved with quiet authority, a presence so commanding that even the sun seemed to dim at his approach. The crowd fell silent, whispers replaced by stunned murmurs. He was the Alpha King. Few had seen him in person, and fewer still had survived encounters with him unscathed. Tales of his power circulated like wildfire, how he ruled not just with sword and law, but with an influence that seemed almost supernatural. Some said he could command shadows to do his bidding, that the mountains themselves obeyed his will. He stopped a few steps away from Ilara, his eyes scanning the crowd, and then with deliberate slowness he turned to her. The air seemed to tighten around her chest. His gaze was not one of appraisal like the others, but of recognition, as if he could see her very soul. "She is mine," he declared, his voice deep and unyielding. The words cut through the courtyard like lightning. Gasps erupted from the nobles and traders alike. "Yours?" one of the older councilmen barked. "She is Barren." "How dare you?" The king's eyes, dark and unblinking, met the man's with a weight that silenced him. "I choose her not for what she can give, but for what she is. She stands before me with strength, and that is more than any of you possess." Ilara's heart raced, a mix of shock and disbelief. She had been prepared for humiliation, for fear, for despair, but not this. Not to be chosen by the most powerful man in the kingdom, a man rumored to bend fate itself with his will. The court murmured in confusion and outrage. Some bowed hastily, others whispered behind hands. The Alpha King, however, seemed indifferent to their opinions. He extended his hand toward her. Ilara hesitated, every instinct warning her to run, to flee from this strange, imposing figure. Yet something in his presence held her rooted. It was not fear alone, nor power. It was a recognition of herself, of the person she had always been inside, despite the world's scorn. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. The contact was firm but not cruel. A shiver ran through her, not from cold but from a sudden awareness of the life-altering path that had just begun. The council erupted in protests, but the king's attention never wavered from her. She will live in my fortress. She will decide her own place in my court. Any who oppose this shall answer to me. As the crowd dispersed under the king's silent command, Ilara felt a mixture of fear and curiosity. Who was this man who could silence nobles with a glance? What power did he truly hold? And why, among all the women deemed worthy or unworthy, had he chosen her? That night, as Ilara was escorted from the city to the Alpha King's fortress, the mountains loomed ahead like jagged teeth against the darkening sky. The fortress itself was a structure of legend. High walls carved from black stone, towers piercing the clouds and gates that seemed alive, etched with runes that flickered faintly in the moonlight. Ilara's mind raced with questions. Would she be a prisoner? A companion? Something more? The king had chosen her, yes, but the weight of that choice pressed on her. She was entering a world far removed from the streets and gossip of her old life, a world of shadows, secrets and unspoken power. As they rode in silence, the only sound the steady rhythm of horses' hooves, Ilara felt a strange presence, a flicker at the edge of her vision. Shadows moved unnaturally along the walls, curling and stretching as if alive. A whisper brushed her ear, soft and unintelligible, yet carrying a warning. She glanced at the king. He did not notice, or perhaps he did and did not care. His eyes were fixed ahead, unwavering, commanding, unshakable. A part of her longed to ask him what these shadows meant, but another part knew that answers here were never given freely. They had to be earned, or survived. By the time they reached the gates of the fortress, night had fallen completely, and the moon cast pale silver light across the black stone. The gates opened with a deep, resonant groan, as if acknowledging her arrival, and the king dismounted first, offering his hand to help her down. Ilara hesitated for only a moment before accepting. The air was thick with something she could not name, power, danger, and the faintest hint of promise. She had survived scorn, judgment, and the harshest whispers of society. Now she faced something far greater, something that could either destroy her or transform her entirely. As the gates closed behind them with a thunderous echo, sealing the world she had known away, Ilara realized that her life had irrevocably changed, and somewhere deep within, a spark of defiance, hope, and curiosity stirred. She had been called worthless, but perhaps here, in this fortress of shadows and power, she would discover what she truly was meant to be. The Alpha King turned to her, his eyes reflecting the faint moonlight, and said quietly, "Welcome, Ilara. You are no longer defined by what they say you cannot do. You are defined by what you choose to become." Ilara swallowed, her throat tight, but a single thought burned clear in her mind. If she was to survive this world, she would need more than courage. She would need to understand the man who had chosen her, and the darkness that bound him. And somewhere, deep within the fortress, the shadows seemed to stir in anticipation, as if the night itself waited to see what would happen next. The fortress loomed like a dark sentinel against the night sky. Its black stone walls seemed to drink in the moonlight, leaving only faint glimmers of silver dancing along the edges of carved runes. Ilara's heart pounded as she followed the Alpha King through a massive archway into the inner courtyard. Each step echoed in the silence, and shadows seemed to twist around them, stretching longer and darker than they should. "This is my home," the king said, his voice low yet carrying a weight that made even the air feel heavier. "Here, the world outside cannot touch you. Yet." Ilara's eyes roamed over the courtyard. Unlike the bustling streets of the kingdom, this place was strangely silent, almost alive in its stillness. Stone statues of warriors carved with frightening precision lined the walls. Between them, small pools reflected the pale moonlight, making the courtyard shimmer like liquid silver. The fortress was more than a home, it was a statement. A declaration of power and secrets. "Where will I stay?" she asked cautiously, unsure of what to expect. The king's gaze swept over her, sharp and assessing, yet not unkind. "You will have a chamber, one befitting someone I choose to keep close. But this is no ordinary room. It carries the history of my line, the whispers of those who came before. You will learn to respect it, or it will teach you." Ilara swallowed. She had been prepared for cruelty, for cold indifference, perhaps even for disdain. But this was something else. The walls seemed to hum, alive with a quiet power. And the king, he was watching her, not as a prize, but as if he were trying to understand her very soul. As they walked through the corridors, The faint flicker of torches cast moving shadows along the walls. Elara felt her pulse quicken with both fear and fascination. The fortress seemed to test her, its corridors twisting and stretching as though it responded to her every thought. She caught herself glancing at the king, wondering how much of the fortress's strange energy belonged to him, and how much was ancient magic older than the kingdom itself. He led her to a chamber high in one of the towers. Heavy oak doors, etched with delicate runes, swung open to reveal a space both beautiful and strange. Rich tapestries covered the walls depicting battles, kings, queens, and creatures she did not recognize. A fire burned in the hearth, casting a warm glow that softened the shadows in the room. "You will sleep here," the king said, stepping back. "But know this, the fortress watches. It notices everything. Nothing escapes it, and nothing is ever forgotten." Elara nodded, unsure whether to feel reassured or intimidated. The room was luxurious, yes, but it carried a weight, a sense of living history that made her feel small. Yet within that weight there was also a spark of something she could not name, a hint that she was not as powerless here as the court had claimed. Before leaving, the king turned to her. His dark eyes held a flicker of something softer, almost human. "Do not let fear control you," he said. "Here you will be tested. But strength is not only in your body, it is in your mind, your courage, your spirit. Fail in these, and the fortress will show you its cruelty." Elara felt the challenge in his words, the quiet weight of responsibility pressing down on her. She had been deemed worthless by her family, by the court, even by the kingdom. And yet here she stood in a fortress alive with power, chosen by the man everyone whispered about in fear and awe. The thought made her both nervous and strangely exhilarated. The next days were a trial in itself. Elara learned the routines of the fortress, the guards who moved like shadows, the servants who whispered secrets in quiet tones, and the strange energies that seemed to linger in the air. Sometimes she would catch flickers of movement where no one should be. Shadows shifted unnaturally, and the whispers of the past seemed to brush her ears with warnings. The king observed her closely, though he rarely spoke directly. When he did, his words were measured, each one carrying weight. "Do not trust everything you see," he said one evening as they walked along the battlements. The wind tugged at their cloaks, carrying the scent of the mountains. "This fortress is older than any king who ruled it. It has seen betrayal, loyalty, love, and hate. It remembers." Elara's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the valley below stretched like a dark sea. "Why me?" she asked softly, almost afraid of the answer. "Why not one of them? One of the women who can give you heirs?" The king's eyes darkened, and for a moment the weight of centuries seemed to press down on him. "Because you are not like them. You do not fear the truth, and you do not bow to what is easy. Strength does not always come from what is expected. Sometimes it comes from what is unexpected." She wanted to ask more, to understand him, to peel away the layers of mystery surrounding this man who had chosen her when the world had written her off. But the fortress seemed to hum, warning her that answers here were given sparingly and often with a price. As the nights passed, Elara began to notice subtle changes. The shadows that once only flickered now lingered longer, almost forming shapes. She would catch glimpses of figures at the edge of her vision, vanishing when she turned fully to look. At first, fear prickled her skin, but slowly, curiosity took its place. Perhaps these were not threats, but tests, challenges to see if she could withstand the fortress's gaze. And then there were the moments with the king. At times, he would appear silently by her side, his presence both comforting and unnerving. He never forced conversation, but his eyes often lingered on her in ways that made her pulse quicken. He asked about her thoughts, her dreams, and her fears, not to interrogate, but to understand. And in those rare moments, the world outside the fortress faded. One evening, as the moonlight poured through the arched windows of her chamber, the king stood at the doorway, his silhouette framed by silver light. "Do you trust me?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Elara hesitated, the question echoing in her mind. Trust was a luxury she had rarely afforded anyone. Yet something about him, the way he saw her, the quiet respect behind his dark gaze, compelled her to answer honestly. "I want to," she said softly, "but I do not know if I can." He stepped closer, just enough that the space between them was electric with unspoken tension. "Trust is not given," he said, "it is earned, and sometimes it is forged in fire." The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of a challenge. And Alara, despite the fear curling in her chest, felt something else stirring, something like hope. That night, as she lay in the soft warmth of her chamber, she could not shake the sense that the fortress was alive, that it was watching, testing, waiting. And yet, amid the flickering shadows and the whispering winds, there was a spark of excitement. For the first time in her life, she was not judged solely for what she could or could not give. She was here for who she was, and that realization burned brighter than any fear. And somewhere in the dark halls of the fortress, the Alpha King watched her. Not as a ruler commands, not as a man demands, but as someone who had seen a rare and unbroken spirit and recognized it as his own challenge, and perhaps his own hope. The nights would grow longer. The shadows would grow darker, and the fortress, alive with whispers and secrets, would not let her journey be easy. But Alara, for the first time, felt the stirrings of courage she had never known. She had survived the scorn of the world outside. Now she would face the scorn, the power, and the secrets of the world within, and she would not be broken. The fortress was alive in ways Alara could not fully understand. Each day she discovered new corners, hidden chambers, and passages that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking. The walls whispered, the torches flickered for no wind, and shadows lingered longer than they should. It was as if the stones themselves watched her, testing her. Yet amidst all this, she could not stop thinking about the king. His presence was a constant, silent force. He rarely spoke of the past, rarely revealed the full measure of his power, but his eyes held a depth that made her pulse quicken. Sometimes she caught him watching her, not with judgment or desire, but as if trying to read her very soul. One evening, he led her to a part of the fortress she had never seen before, a long corridor lined with tapestries depicting the kings and queens of his line. Their faces were stern, proud, and yet there was something almost sorrowful in their eyes, as if they carried the weight of centuries of expectation and grief. "These are the rulers who came before me," he said quietly, his voice echoing off the cold stone. "Each faced the same burdens, the same shadows that linger in this fortress, and each left behind stories, some of triumph, some of tragedy." Alara's fingers brushed over a tapestry showing a woman standing alone, her expression proud but weary. "Who is she?" she asked. He hesitated, a shadow crossing his features. "She was chosen before you." She could not withstand what this place demanded. The fortress tests all who enter. Some break, some survive. Few leave unchanged. A chill ran down Alara's spine. She had known the king's power was feared, but the weight of his history and the unspoken curse hinted at in his words made her heart tighten. She realized that being chosen by him was not merely a privilege. It was a trial, one that might demand more than she was ready to give. That night, in her chamber, she could not sleep. Shadows moved along the walls, whispers brushing the edges of her mind. She tried to focus on the fire in the hearth, the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat, yet the unease lingered. She felt the fortress watching, judging, and perhaps even warning her. Days turned into weeks, and Alara began to learn the fortress's rhythms. Guards moved like shadows, silent and precise. Servants carried out tasks with quiet reverence, speaking in hushed tones about things she did not understand. And the king. He remained a constant, observing, guiding, testing. One evening he appeared at the doorway of her chamber without warning. The moonlight framed his dark silhouette, and for a moment Alara felt both fear and a strange comfort. "You do not sleep well," he said, his voice soft, almost a whisper. I am not used to this place," she admitted. "It is alive and it watches. I cannot rest while it feels aware of me." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "The fortress tests more than your body, Alara. It tests your spirit. It sees fear but also courage. It will know if you are ready to face what lies ahead." She swallowed, her throat tight. "And what lies ahead?" He looked at her then, eyes dark and intense. "You will see soon enough. There are secrets here old as this kingdom itself, and some are dangerous." For the first time she saw a flicker of something else in him. Concern. Not for himself, but for her. And it unsettled her more than any shadow in the fortress. The next day he took her to the inner sanctum, a chamber hidden behind a wall of stone. The door was massive, carved with runes that glowed faintly as they approached. Inside, the room was filled with books, scrolls, and artifacts that seemed older than time itself. The air smelled of dust, ink, and something faintly metallic. like the echo of power long contained. "This is where the history of my line is kept," the king said. "Here you will learn truths that are not spoken aloud, and here you will understand the weight of what it means to be chosen." Ilara moved carefully, touching the spines of ancient tomes. Some hummed faintly under her fingers as if alive. Her heart raced. She had never seen anything like this, a place where knowledge, power, and danger intertwined so completely. "Many who come here fear what they will find," the king said, watching her closely. "But fear is not the test. Understanding, that is what is required." Ilara's fingers fell on a particular scroll. Its edges frayed, its ink faded. As she opened it, she realized it detailed a curse that had haunted his family for generations. Each ruler, it said, was bound by a shadow, an unseen force that demanded both loyalty and sacrifice. Those who failed to navigate it were consumed, lost to the fortress or to the very power they sought to wield. Her heart skipped a beat. She had suspected there was more to the king than mere legend, but the weight of this revelation made her chest tighten. "You have found it," he said softly, stepping closer. "The curse. It is not spoken of lightly. Few survive knowing its full truth." I do not understand," she said. "Why tell me this?" "Because you must decide," he said. "You are not like the others. You are strong, and I believe you can face it. But strength is not enough. Courage is not enough. You must understand the choices you make and the consequences they carry." Ilara's mind raced. The fortress, the king, the curse, all of it was a puzzle, a test, and she was at its center. Yet beneath the fear something stirred. A spark of defiance, a desire to prove herself not worthless, not powerless. She would face this curse, whatever it demanded. Over the following days, she observed the king more closely. He was not cruel nor indifferent. He was exacting, precise, and commanding. But there were moments, rare, fleeting, when his guard slipped. When he thought no one was watching, his eyes softened, his posture relaxed, and she glimpsed a man burdened by centuries of expectation, haunted by a legacy he did not fully control. And in those moments, Ilara felt a connection growing. It was not spoken aloud, not declared with grand gestures, but it existed, a shared understanding of loneliness, of responsibility, of fear, and of strength. One evening, they walked along the battlements, the wind cold against their faces, the mountains stretching like silent guardians in the distance. The king spoke quietly, almost to himself. "Many would see me as a ruler, a king with power beyond measure. But that power, it is a prison as much as it is a weapon. I am bound by this fortress, by my blood, by the curse." Ilara's heart ached at the glimpse of vulnerability. She reached out, hesitating, then placed her hand gently on his arm. "Then let me stand with you," she said softly. "If the curse binds you, we can face it together." He looked down at her, the shadow of a smile flickering across his features. "Few would offer such trust," he murmured. "Fewer still would survive it." The night stretched on, the wind carrying whispers through the fortress walls. Shadows danced around them, sometimes forming shapes that seemed almost human, almost alive. The fortress itself seemed to respond to their connection, watching, waiting, testing. And then, in a hidden corner of the battlements, a shadow detached itself from the darkness. Ilara caught a fleeting glimpse of something moving unnaturally, faster than any human could. Her breath caught and the king's hand tightened slightly around hers. "It has begun," he said quietly. "The fortress does not like change, Ilara, and we are changing it." Ilara's pulse raced. She had faced scorn, fear, and doubt all her life. She had survived judgment and whispers. But this was something far greater, something alive, ancient, and dangerous. And yet, amidst the fear, there was something else, a spark of exhilaration, a sense of purpose she had never known. She was no longer merely a pawn in the court's cruel games. She had been chosen. She had been tested. And now she would face the shadows, the curse, and the secrets of the fortress with the king by her side. The fortress watched silently, the whispers of the past curling through the halls. The shadows deepened, and in the quiet, almost invisible moments, a connection between the king and Ilara grew, delicate, dangerous, and powerful. For the first time, Ilara understood that this was not just a test of strength. It was a test of heart, of courage, and of trust, and she would not fail. The fortress had never felt so alive. Shadows stretched along the walls like dark rivers. twisting and flickering as if aware of every step Alara took. The air seemed thicker, charged with a quiet energy that pressed against her chest. She could feel it in her bones. The fortress itself was watching, waiting, testing. The Alpha King moved beside her, silent and steady, his presence a shield against both the unknown and the whispers of fear that plagued her mind. He had been patient, guiding her through the fortress's secrets, sharing only what he deemed necessary. Yet even in his quiet command there was a warmth, a subtle understanding that made her pulse quicken. Alara had begun to learn the fortress's rhythm, the guards who moved like shadows, the servants who whispered in hushed tones about things she did not fully understand, and the walls themselves that seemed to hum with life. She had also begun to learn about the king, glimpses of the man behind the ruler, glimpses of loneliness, pride, and pain that made her heart ache with empathy, but the peace was fragile. It began with small incidents, a guard missing from his post, a shadow moving too quickly for the eye to follow, a whisper in the halls that seemed almost human. The king noticed too, his dark eyes narrowing as he scanned the corridors with a predator's focus. "They are testing us," he said quietly one night as they walked along the battlements. The wind whipped around them, tugging at their cloaks and carrying the scent of the distant mountains. The fortress does not like change. It challenges what it does not understand, and we are a change it cannot ignore. Alara shivered, not entirely from the cold. She understood now that the danger was not only from the supernatural shadows, but also from the people outside the fortress, those who would not tolerate the king's choice, those who had once mocked and scorned her. Their enemies were patient, cunning, and cruel. Days later, chaos arrived in the form of an attack. Under the cover of darkness, intruders breached the outer walls, moving with the precision of hunters. Guards sounded the alarm, and the fortress erupted in noise. Clanging steel shouted commands, and the echo of footsteps racing through stone corridors. Alara's heart pounded as the king appeared beside her, his presence both commanding and protective. "Stay close," he ordered. "The fortress will shield us, but we must act." They moved together through the twisting halls, the shadows curling around them as if alive. Alara realized she had come to trust him, not blindly, but with a sharp awareness of his abilities and judgment. He was powerful, yes, but also human, capable of doubt, capable of care. In the central hall, they encountered the intruders, masked figures, swift and silent, armed with weapons forged to pierce both flesh and armor. The king acted without hesitation, his movements precise, almost ritualistic. Alara followed, her own instincts sharpening as she dodged, blocked, and struck where she could. She was no longer the girl deemed worthless. She was a force learning to move in harmony with the king's rhythm. Amid the chaos, there were moments of quiet understanding. A glance shared across a corridor, a hand brushed to steady the other, a fleeting smile amidst the shadows. In those moments, their bond deepened, unspoken but undeniable. After the attack, the fortress fell silent once more, though the air still hummed with tension. The intruders had been repelled, but Alara knew the danger was far from over. The king's eyes were dark as he surveyed the damage, and for the first time she saw fear, not for himself but for her. "You are stronger than I expected," he said quietly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "But strength alone will not protect you. You must understand the curse, the fortress, and..." Alara nodded, her mind racing. The curse, the shadows, the intruders, it was all connected. The fortress, the king, and herself were bound together in a delicate, dangerous balance. And yet, despite the fear, she felt a strange exhilaration. She was alive in a way she had never been before, facing trials that demanded courage, intelligence, and heart. Over the following days, she learned more about the curse. The king revealed fragments of its history, a shadow that demanded loyalty and sacrifice, a test that had claimed many before her, and a prophecy that hinted at change. Alara listened carefully, absorbing every word, every warning, every subtle nuance. She was determined not to be like the women before her, to survive and perhaps even to rewrite the rules of the curse itself. Their connection grew in these days of quiet study and preparation. The king shared stories of his past, moments of vulnerability hidden behind years of command. Alara, in turn, shared her own experiences, not the courtly whispers, but the truths of her fears, her doubts, and her defiance. In the quiet of the fortress, they found a fragile intimacy, built not on grand gestures but on understanding and trust. One evening, as a storm raged outside, the fortress seemed to respond. Lightning illuminated the dark halls and the wind howled like a living thing. Shadows danced on the walls, larger and more defined than ever before. The king led Alara to the inner sanctum, a chamber filled with ancient texts and artifacts. "This is where the final trial will be prepared," he said. "The curse will challenge us both. But it is not only the fortress that tests, it is also the darkness within ourselves." Alara studied him, her heart pounding. She had come to trust him, yes, but she knew that trust would be tested. The bond between them was strong, but the storm outside and the shadows within the fortress were constant reminders that danger lurked at every turn. As they worked together, preparing for the trials ahead, moments of closeness emerged. A shared look, a hand brushing against another, a quiet word spoken in the flickering light of the storm. The tension between them was palpable, charged with emotions neither fully understood, yet both felt keenly. And then, in the dead of night, the shadows moved again. Figures appeared at the edge of the corridors, faster than any human could move, their forms twisting unnaturally. The king acted without hesitation, moving to intercept, while Alara followed, her mind and body working in perfect harmony with him. The battle was brief but intense. The intruders were driven back, leaving behind only the echo of their presence and a warning that the fortress, and the world outside, would not tolerate weakness. Afterward, they stood together on the battlements, rain and wind lashing at them, lightning illuminating the mountains beyond. The king's hand brushed against hers, a fleeting, almost accidental touch, yet it carried a weight neither could ignore. "Alara," he said quietly, his voice almost lost in the storm, "do you understand now? This is not a fortress of stone alone. It is a fortress of trials, of power, and of shadows. And we are bound to it. Together," she nodded, her heart racing. "I understand. And I will face it. Whatever comes, I will not run." He looked at her then, eyes dark and intense but softened by something she could not name. "Good," he said, "because the storm has only begun." As the storm raged around them, the fortress alive with its own power, Alara realized something profound. She had come here expecting to be a pawn, a powerless girl at the mercy of fate and judgment. Instead, she had discovered courage, strength, and a bond that defied fear itself, and she knew, deep in her heart, that whatever trials awaited, she would not face them alone. The shadows of the fortress stirred, whispering their ancient warnings. The king's eyes held both promise and danger, and amidst it all, a connection between them, fragile yet unbreakable, grew stronger. Alara had survived scorn. She had survived fear, and now she would survive the storm. The fortress trembled that night as the storm reached its peak. Thunder rolled through the mountains like the roar of some ancient beast, and lightning flashed, illuminating the jagged walls in silver fire. Shadows writhed along the corridors, alive and restless, as if they knew the final test had begun. Alara stood at the center of the inner sanctum. The scrolls and artifacts of the fortress spread around her like silent witnesses. The king's presence was steady at her side, a calm anchor in the chaos. Together, they had prepared for this moment, studied the curse and strengthened their bond. Yet the enormity of the challenge before them made her heart pound with anticipation and fear. "The curse will demand more than strength," the king said, his voice low but firm. "It will confront our deepest fears, the shadows that linger in our souls. We must face it together, and we must not waver." Alara nodded, gripping his hand tightly. She had survived scorn, betrayal, and doubt. But now she understood that this trial was not only of body but of spirit. The fortress itself seemed to hum in anticipation, shadows twisting along the walls and floor, forming shapes that were almost human, almost alive. The first wave of the curse emerged as whispers, echoing through the chamber, speaking of failures, of weakness, of worthlessness. Alara felt them claw at her mind, dredging up every memory of scorn, every insult, every judgment she had endured. She faltered for a moment, feeling the familiar sting of self-doubt, but the king's hand squeezed hers, grounding her. "You are not them," he said quietly. "You are not defined by what they say. Face it, own it, command it." The shadows surged forward, coalescing into forms that reflected their fears, figures of nobles, whispering and laughing, blurred faces of women who had been chosen before her and failed, and even the echoes of her own insecurities. They moved with purpose, relentless and cruel. Elara took a deep breath, summoning the courage that had brought her this far. She raised her chin, her voice clear and unwavering. I am not worthless. I am not weak. I am here, and I will not be broken. The king stepped beside her, his own presence a beacon of power and certainty. Together they faced the shadows. He moved with a precision that was almost ritualistic, his every gesture bending the darkness, guiding it, containing it. Elara mirrored his movements, learning to channel her own inner strength, her own courage, into the challenge before them. The shadows hesitated, recoiling from the unity between them. Whispers grew frantic, twisting into screams, yet the king and Elara did not falter. Each word of fear, each image of doubt was met with defiance, with strength, with trust. Hours seemed to pass like minutes. The storm outside raged, but inside the fortress a calm emerged amidst the chaos. Elara felt the connection between herself and the king deepen, a bond forged not by desire alone, but by shared courage, shared trials, and the knowledge that together they could withstand even the darkest forces. Finally, the shadows condensed into one final form, a dark reflection of the king himself. Its eyes mirrored his, yet they were twisted with sorrow and rage. You cannot escape me, it hissed. The curse is eternal. You will fail as all who came before did. The king faced the shadow without hesitation. I am not alone, he said, his voice strong and unwavering. I am bound by the fortress, yes, but I am also bound by her. Together we will endure. Together we will choose our own path. Elara stepped forward, heart pounding, fear and courage intertwined. You may be powerful, Shadow, she said, her voice steady, but we are stronger together. We are not defined by the past. We are defined by what we choose to be. The shadow recoiled, its form flickering, unstable. The fortress trembled, walls shifting as if alive, responding to the confrontation. Lightning illuminated the chamber, casting both light and darkness in stark contrast. For a moment, time seemed to stop, then as one, the king and Elara reached out, hands clasped, hearts aligned, and they commanded the shadows, not with force, but with understanding, with courage, with trust. The dark figure screamed, twisting and writhing, and then, with a final burst of energy, it dissipated into nothingness. The fortress fell silent. The storm outside began to calm, rain softening to a gentle patter, and the air seemed lighter, freer. Elara sank to her knees, exhausted, trembling, yet filled with a sense of triumph she had never known. The king knelt beside her, his hand steadying her, his eyes reflecting pride, relief, and something far deeper. You did it, he said softly. We did it. Elara looked up at him, her heart still racing. I was terrified, she admitted, but I never wanted to fail you, or myself. He smiled faintly, a rare warmth breaking through his usually guarded expression. You were never meant to fail. You were meant to survive, and to teach me to survive alongside you. In that moment, the fortress itself seemed to acknowledge their victory. Shadows retreated into the walls, whispers softened into silence, and the air carried a calm that had been absent for centuries. They had not only faced the curse, they had changed it, reshaping its power through courage, trust, and unity. Days passed, and the fortress gradually returned to its quiet, watchful state. Elara moved through its halls with confidence now, no longer fearful of shadows, of whispers, or of judgment. The king's guidance remained, but their partnership had shifted. They were equals in strength, in courage, and in understanding. Their bond deepened further in the quiet moments between trials. A shared glance, a gentle touch, a word spoken softly in the flickering light of the hearth. They discovered that trust, once earned, could grow into something profound and lasting. One evening, as the sun set over the jagged mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the king took Elara to the highest tower of the fortress. The wind tugged at their cloaks, and the view stretched endlessly, a sea of mountains and valleys bathed in light. You have changed everything, he said, his voice carrying both awe and admiration. Not just the fortress, not just the curse, but me. You have shown me what it means to trust, to hope, and to see beyond shadows. Elara felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mix of pride, relief, and something tender, unspoken, yet undeniable. I was afraid, she admitted. But you gave me courage. You gave me trust when I did not know I could accept it. He took her hand gently, holding it against his chest. And you have given me something I thought lost to time. Faith that even the darkest shadows can be faced, and that love in its quiet strength can endure. For the first time, they allowed themselves to stand fully together, not as ruler and chosen, not as master and subject, but as equals, bound by trials, courage, and the recognition of each other's spirit. The fortress, long a place of shadows and tests, seemed to breathe with them, its walls no longer threatening but protective, alive in a new way, acknowledging the union of courage and trust that had transformed it. Ilara looked out over the mountains, the wind carrying the scent of rain and earth, and realized how far she had come. From a girl scorned and deemed worthless, she had become a force, a survivor, and now a partner to a man who had once seemed untouchable. She had faced fear, darkness, and judgment, and emerged stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever came next. The king's gaze met hers, and in that look, words were unnecessary. They had survived the curse. They had endured the fortress. And they had discovered something far greater than power, far greater than survival. A bond forged in shadows, tested by storms and strengthened by courage, trust and love. As night fell, the fortress stood silent and watchful, no longer a prison, no longer a place of fear. It had been transformed just as they had been. And in that transformation, Ilara and the king found not only victory but hope, and the promise of a future that they would shape together. The shadows whispered no longer. They had become part of the light. And for the first time in centuries, the fortress, the king, and the girl he had chosen stood united, ready to face the world beyond, stronger together than they could ever have been apart.